Hello everyone, welcome back to our YouTube channel. Got a discussion to do with Sarah Ward, our housing officer, based on the Cabinet meeting last night. This was on the 13th of March, and it was the Cabinet from Poole Council deciding what to do with the PSPO around the target of homeless people. So Sarah's got a lot of information.
Yeah, it was a very interesting evening. It was interesting to see democracy so-called in action, and just what a town looks like when it is governed by a majority Tory council, and it's not a pretty sight at all, and we need to change it as soon as possible. It would be very easy today to be sitting here feeling really downhearted and miserable about the outcome, which was that by a majority vote, the Tory committee voted to push through the public spaces protection orders and not change any of the wording, which we feel very strongly still targets rough sleepers and people who might be particularly vulnerable. The reasons that we felt so strongly about this was because the wording, and they deny that it targets those people, but the wording that remains specifically outlines that they class a certain type of antisocial behaviour, and that PSPOs are supposed to be only concerned with antisocial behaviour. So that's drinking, drug dealing, being loud and aggressive, dancing inappropriately. I think I made that one up.
Yeah, well, we might do occasionally, but
rough sleeping is not an antisocial behaviour. It's the last possible recourse to someone who has been let down by the society around them. But under this Tory-led Poole Council, rough sleeping, and the way they describe it in their wording, is people blocking doorways or car parks. Well, the only people who do that are people who are rough sleeping. So, the sitting down with a receptacle that could be used for begging for money. Again, the majority of people who might be doing that, again, because they've got no other recourse, and actually they are protected under human rights law to be able to do that, are people who have run out of options, i.e. rough sleepers. So we still maintain very strongly that they're just getting this wrong. What I found really interesting about last night was that, and this is not letting them off the hook in any way, I genuinely don't think they see the connection between the policies that they and their paymasters up in Westminster and the Tory government have brought in over the last 10 years, the connection between that and the fact that rough sleeping in the last 10 years has risen by 169%. 169% rise in rough sleeping in 10 years. In 2010, I was working with homeless services at the time, rough sleeping was down to some of the lowest numbers. There was still a lot of work to do, but it was a really good record low. And services that support rough sleepers were well funded. Even within the sector, we knew we were well funded and we had the resources. Since then,
stop my cat. Sorry, 2 moments.
Yeah, shall I carry on?
Carry on, yeah.
Since then, funding has been slashed to ridiculously low levels. The Supporting People grant, which was the main grant that services had, has gone. That doesn't exist. The funding that was remained for services that support rough sleepers was not ring-fenced. So as local authorities have been under austerity measures, they've had to choose where they spend that money. And of course, we all know that adult social care is one of the biggest demands on local authorities, and understandably so, but it means that rough sleeper services have been the absolute last winners in terms of any kind of local authority funding. So when you read through the papers that the council have put together, and they talk about the services they have in place for helping rough sleepers, what people need to know is those services have been cut and cut and cut. I myself no longer work in homelessness services. That's partly through personal circumstance, but partly because I was made redundant because the organisation where I worked had to have a restructure as a direct result of the cuts that have come in.
There's
So-
that disconnect, isn't there, from
Total
the
disconnect.
central government austerity measures.
Yeah, and I think
They're not connecting the two things together.
they don't connect the two, and they have a very firmly held inherent belief, and I believe that poverty is self-inflicted. It's a fundamental belief of being a conservative, that poverty is a self-inflicted act, and that actually
not working hard.
Yeah.
So
So when you read things in the paperwork which talks about, and it's very subtle, but it's really pervasive and toxic, and a lot of people would read it and not necessarily question it because of the way it's written, and so kind of be brought in by this narrative. So things like the work that the frontline agencies do, where they offer, they engage with rough sleepers and offer them support. Some choose to take up those offers of support, and some don't. Again, what that tells people who don't necessarily know more about it or understand it is that being homeless, being on the streets, is a choice. It's not a choice.
No,
And I know, having run and worked in those frontline services, and the work that those amazing services do, is that they can offer all the support they want, but if they have nowhere to put people into and the support to wrap around them, and not enough places, there might be some but not enough, and there is nowhere near enough, then it doesn't matter how persuasive and engaging they are.
Not
It's
at
a
all.
thankless task, and it doesn't matter how engaged the rough sleeper wants to be. There's nowhere for them to go. Then we're just stuck, and we see that because the numbers are rising. So
Well, I was saying yesterday as well that they were trying to sing their own praises yesterday with regard to the fact, we've got emergency beds in place. We've got emergency beds. How many emergency beds do they have?
There are 2 emergency beds,
Wow.
which we managed to set up. And the only reason we managed to set them up at the time, when I say we, it was the organisation I worked with, and I'm not going to name names. We were only able to do that because we used assistive technology, so that they could have a bit like a helpline you get in sheltered accommodation. It was really kind of cutting edge stuff for the time we brought it in. They wouldn't have been able to do that without that, because that would have involved having extra people to support those people, and there was no funding for that.
No.
So we found them a solution to enable them to have those emergency beds, but there's only 2, and with 18 currently people on the streets and the numbers rising, that's clearly not enough, because you get people into those emergency beds, there isn't enough housing moving on, and crucially there is some support for people with addictions and mental health issues, but everybody knows it's not enough. Those services have been slashed as well. And also we know the difficulties of anybody on benefits, for example, getting into the private rented sector is horrendous. So all of those things mean that those 2 beds are clogged up almost straight away, and it's very difficult for them to be used as an emergency bed.
Because it's hard to get the people using them onto the next step and out of the loop.
Yeah, exactly. The other point they made was, we asked them a question about if we're saying to people you can't sleep in doorways, which is what they're basically saying, or
car parks,
which are the 2 areas where rough sleepers generally will go, because they're sheltered and hidden away, which you feel vulnerable when you're rough sleeping. You want to be hidden away. Then if they can't sleep there, then they're going to move on. They're going to move on to other areas, and the rough sleeper teams need to have that intelligence as to where people are sleeping, so they can go and offer the support. So if they don't know where they are, then they can't find them, and we know that this happened recently with the SWEP, the winter emergency provision that was put in place. Whilst one of the councillors went to great pains to talk about the one rough sleeper who was found by a member of the public ringing in, which is great. What I know from people I've spoken to who work in the areas is that there were a number of rough sleepers who could not be found because they weren't in, even though this hasn't come into place yet, the fear of...
Well, yeah, because it came into place suddenly on the 1st of February without any notice to the community.
Yeah, so we know that there were some rough sleepers who did kind of go underground and disperse, which is what the Tory councillors wanted them to do, but it meant that when the weather was -12 or whatever, or felt like, they couldn't find them. So
on the back of that, one of the issues I've got with this is Councillor John Ranton was very, very pleased. He said that they're now going to have the power to remove possessions and belongings which are left on the streets. Homeless Kev, in January, he died because potentially his belongings were removed by the council. And they want to do it again. So they're not learning lessons. They're not treating people as human beings.
No, it's and also, again, it's the big picture here is that we have in an incredibly wealthy town, on overall, you know, I know there are areas of deprivation absolutely that need to do lots of work around, but generally
speaking, a very wealthy town.
We've got 18 rough sleepers, roughly, or thereabouts. There are two things about that. One is there shouldn't be any, and in fact there was a time in Poole where there were very, very few. And when I was involved in running services, there were many occasions where there was one or two rough sleepers, which is, you know, none would be great, but one or two is good. So there shouldn't be any, but 18 is not a massive number. And the intelligence on who those 18 are is very good because of the work that the frontline staff do. So we know roughly where people bed down, whose baggage is likely to be left somewhere. We also know that if, from the work that day centres do up and down the country, that if there is a place where people can go to during the day, where, rough sleepers, where they can engage with agencies, where they can feel safe, where they can store their belongings safely, then they will take up that offer. There is no place. There used to be a day centre in neighbouring town of Bournemouth. That's been closed by the Tory-led council there. There is great work done by Roots to Roots, for example, in Poole, and Salvation Army also do a drop-in, but it's not enough. And what we need is a dedicated day centre provision. What we don't need is to get alarmist and start saying that rough sleepers' baggage is a security threat. It's yet again this narrative that
it's a security threat supposedly, but also when the receptacle for begging, don't you know that all rough sleepers are drug users?
Yeah, that's the other narrative, isn't it? Yeah,
that was ridiculous. So again, Councillor John Ranton believes that it's all down to solvents misuse, and he doesn't like receptacles being down for begging because rough sleepers are drug users, according to him.
Don't you know? There are rough sleepers who use drugs and use alcohol, absolutely. And you know, let's face it, there are. I would not condone using drugs or drinking, obviously, but there are reasons for that. You know, when people are met with extreme challenges,
hellish existence.
They use the resources, rightly or wrongly, and damaging as they are, to their disposal. But what we also know, and what Poole Council knows full well, is that the majority of people involved in the antisocial behaviour around drinking and drug crime are not rough sleepers. That is a fact. There will be some rough sleepers involved in that, but the majority has, and that's the same from any city you go to. So there is a section of the community where the public space protection orders, and we as Labour have been very clear about this from the beginning, where they are appropriate, and they do need to use them to target that behaviour, because actually rough sleepers often are the ones who are most at risk from that. So to be absolutely clear, we're not saying that rough sleepers are angels, and you know, but what we're also not saying is that they should be demonised. They are human beings. They are men and women who have been massively let down and who are at risk from this behaviour that the public space protection orders should be addressing, but they should not be being targeted by it, and that maintains our position,
isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The crux of it, in terms of the way the Tories are pushing it, is that the interests of the sole traders, of the businesses, and of the residents, although we would argue that the residents have actually voiced that it isn't rough sleeping and begging isn't an issue for them, but they're, and in fact one of the Councillor Rampton, I think it was, I might have got that wrong, said very clearly last night, I felt that basically the interests that this is serving are that of a seaside town that wants to be seen to be a lovely place to come to, Of course it does.
For business as the trade and for
You
money to be
can't.
made.
Yeah, but rough sleepers cannot be seen to be the demon in that. They are the outcome of a wider system and a local system that isn't working. So we carry on.
Absolutely. We've got a series of videos coming up. I'm editing a few little sound bites. The main video of the meeting is up on YouTube already. I believe we're going to plan some kind of protest.
Yeah.
Maybe a mass sleep out on the streets, break some laws, who knows?
Why not?
Yeah, what we're going to do.
I think, it is really important to keep, if you are bothered about this, which I hope anyone watching this is, write to your local councillor, write to Robert Sims. I don't know if you'll know who he is. He's your local MP. You won't get a response, I can tell you that now, but write to him anyway, because we need to be vocal about this. We need to let it be known. We are looking into supporting a legal challenge. We've 6 weeks before it comes in, and within that time, anybody who is a local resident and directly affected or either lives or works in the postcode that these public space protection orders cover can actually launch a legal action. So if you're really, really annoyed about this and you think, actually, yeah, I'm going to do that, you can request a judicial review of this action. Liberty are giving us advice, which is great, and we would let anybody be privy to that advice. So yeah, it's not just down to the Labour Party, although we are looking into doing that. Anyone who wishes to bring a legal case can do so. And I would say with the wording they've still got in place, which goes against Home Office guidance, there's a strong legal case to be made. And actually, sometimes just showing that we're prepared to go to that stage is enough to get a local authority or whoever to properly relook. We know from the way they've gone through this, the way they tried to get it through without even going to committee, that they thought they could just sneak this in. They know they can't do that now. So if we show them we're still not going away, then they may be forced yet again to go back and change the wording. We're not asking them to scrap the public space protection order. They would like to make people believe that we are. They are there to be used in a proportional way. What we're saying is this is not proportionate when it comes to rough sleepers. So let's challenge it. Let's not give up.
Absolutely. So keep on fighting. We will. Thank you very much for watching, Sarah. Thanks for coming down and filming it. And yeah, keep in touch. Yeah. Keep watching us on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and our YouTube channel, and we'll keep you updated with all news. Cheers.